Good evening. Welcome to KET's special coverage of Kentucky's primary election 2024. I'm Renee Shaw. Thank you for joining us. Polls are closed across Kentucky. Kentuckians are picking Republican and Democratic nominees for U.S. President, 6 U.S. congressional races, 19 state Senate seats, and all 100 state House seats. There are also elections for some Commonwealth's attorney races, as well as a number of county and local races. KET has crews on the ground for tonight's coverage. Our June Leffler is in Louisville and our Laura Rogers is in Bowling Green. And we have analysis from our team of veteran political observers. Joining us in the Lexington studio are veteran political journalist Al Cross, Director Emeritus of the Institute for Rural Journalism and Community Issues at the University of Kentucky, Trey Grayson, Kentucky Secretary of State from 2004 to 2011 and attorney with Frost Brown Todd, Bob Babbage, Kentucky State Auditor from 1988 to 92 and Secretary of State from 92 to 96, and founder of the government relations firm Babbage, co-founder. Amy Wycliffe, Republican strategist with McCarthy Strategic Solutions, and Kelsey Hayes-Goots, Democratic strategist and principal at Blue Dot Consulting. Our thanks to all of our panelists and others who will be joining us throughout the evening tonight. We appreciate all of you tuning in for KET's coverage on KET, on air, or through one of our public radio partners across the state. Special shout out to Louisville Public Media, who's simulcasting tonight's program. So let's start with what we know. And we're going to start with not really the top of the ticket, but some of the congressional races that the Associated Press has called this evening. And we'll put those up full screen for you to see. In the 3rd Congressional District, the Democratic primary has been called for Morgan McGarvey, the incumbent. In the 4th GOP primary, Thomas Massey, AP has called that race for him, the incumbent. In the 5th GOP primary, Congressman Hal Rogers, who's wanting to serve a 23rd term in Congress, the race has been called for him. There are other races that we are looking at right now, too, on the state House level. So if we're looking now at, go to the Senate District number 11, we're going to run down some of these that we know the Associated Press has called for us so far. So let's talk about these as we go through them so that we have time to actually show folks who the contenders are on the screen. Senate District number 11. This is an interesting race, Trey Grayson. Talk to us about this. This is your territory.
Yeah, I don't actually live in the district. I live on the other side of the street. You know, I live in the lower red part of Boone County.
Close enough.
Close enough, though. You know, Rawlings is a first-term member of the state house. The outcome is not a surprise. I mean, Boone County, if you look at the last couple of cycles, the more libertarian, liberty candidates have done really well at the local level and at the state level. Frolicker last year, or 2 years ago, ran for mayor of Florence, lost, was a city council member. So the margin and the outcome is not a particular surprise to those who are watching this race. Any other comment on that? Amy Wycliffe?
I will say Dwayne Frolicker, he did have, I believe he served on the local level. There was a little bit of outside spending in this race. It may have come in a little bit late on this race, I think. But again, you know, you see more of the Liberty movement and the Liberty candidates performing well tonight up in northern Kentucky. Not everywhere, but a little bit of everywhere.
Well, you know, one thing I should add, especially for Rawlings, is he's got a really good ground game. And turnout, I haven't seen the final numbers, but I did early voting on Saturday. I was a poll worker. We had like about 1% of the folks vote countywide in that turnout, in that primary. So a ground game was very instrumental, and I think Rawlings, you know, lots of stories, people knocking on doors on his behalf, and that made a big difference.
So let's move on to the seat that's being vacated by the current State Senate Majority Leader Damon Thayer. This is District number 17. Matt Nunn and Julia Jadek. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Jadek. So talk to us about this, and we can see the results here.
So this race, you know, this is an odd district. It's southern Kenton County, all of Grant County, all of Scott County. It was Damon Thayer's, you know, was really the only person to represent this district because it was created about 20 years ago, right? And he won a special election. Nunn received a lot of support from Scott County business leaders. Thayer very publicly endorsed Nunn. Jadek was more of one of the Liberty candidates here. And, you know, I think a lot of the local elected officials took their cue from Thayer that Nunn was their guy. But I think, you know, we're all wondering, and we'll talk a lot about tonight, about these insurgent candidates.
What is an insurgent candidate?
Well, that's a better term than liberty in my book.
Okay, tell us why.
Because liberty is so ill-defined. You know, it's partly libertarian, it's partly Trump, it's partly populist. It's a lot anti-incumbent, it's a lot anti-McConnell and pro-Rand Paul and Tom Massey.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would like to get back, though. I think Matt Nunn, he is going to be, I think he's going to be a really great candidate in the fall as well. This does have a general race. He's very well known, very well liked, small business owner, really pounded the pavement, did the work to win this race, and I think the numbers are proving that out for him tonight.
Yeah, I think he's got a Toyota background, a small business background, and a military background. So that's a good three for as a political background, but also to be successful once you actually are elected.
Yeah. State Senate District number 29, Johnny Turner pulling this one out pretty comfortably. This is the incumbent. This is to be expected.
No surprise here. Johnny L. Turner, he is wonderful with his constituents that is showing up tonight in the votes. Of course, he doesn't take anything for granted, but I'd be glad to have him back. So.
Okay. Any other comment about?
Well, let's just say where this district is, because these Eastern Kentucky districts have grown as the population has shrunk. So now you have a senator from Harlan, Johnny Turner, representing Floyd County, which used to be represented by another Johnny Turner.
Right.
Right. Johnny Ray, Johnny L.
Knott, and Letcher.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of the coal field.
Yeah, and all the way down to Knott County, too.
Yeah, Turner's a workhorse. He really puts a lot of time in on the district, on the issues, knows the history of his area, and works in overdrive. And with the race last time being Turner against Turner, the Turner brand is pretty well embedded.
Either way you shake it.
Yeah, we knew Turner was going to win 4 years ago. Right? That was pretty clear.
Johnny Turner was.
Well,
Yeah,
the folks like their consistency in names, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move to a couple of these House races, and then we want to go to another shot out in the field. So let's talk about House District 66. This is Boone County as well. So this is Ed Massey was making another stab out of this after falling a couple of years ago, but he had some hefty competition with T.J. Roberts, and look where we are tonight.
So Massey lost to Rawlings, who we talked about earlier in the Senate race 2 years ago, by about a 2-to-1 margin. And he came back this time. And there were some folks, I think, who thought Massey would have a better shot, that Roberts wasn't as strong of a candidate as Rawlings, but he actually did worse, at least on a percentage basis. Roberts has been a GOP activist, pretty involved in a lot of campaigns. One thing that happened today, which I thought was a brilliant little maneuver, Massey had given money to Hillary Clinton in 2008. It's a public record. And on Election Day this morning, the Roberts campaign put signs in front of every polling place just outside the electioneering prohibition zone that said Ed Massey supported Hillary Clinton. So if you were going in to vote and you weren't sure, that was probably a pretty good message in a Republican primary. But again, like with Rawlings, great ground game, lots of people coming in.
Is this considered an upset?
No, not in my book. I would say the only upset to me is the margin, not the outcome.
You agree, Amy?
Perhaps somewhat. I think a little bit of this is that this, to me, I think we can talk about who turns out in a Republican primary when there's nothing at the top of the ticket that's bringing people out, right? If you're a Republican and you voted in this election cycle, you are the people who can't wait to be engaged. You take every opportunity to be engaged in the political system. And so I think that T.J. Roberts folks evidently had a great turnout program and really turned the people out. I also believe, the disappointing thing about this race was this race has been in the gutter for the last month or so, maybe even longer. And so you wonder if at some point that turns people off, right?
I had a turnout question about Northern Kentucky. With all those municipalities up there, were there any local elections that would turn people out?
Not in Boone County. I don't think there were any primaries in Boone County. Actually, I know there were not any primaries in Boone County, because if you were a Democrat in Boone County, you had nothing to vote for. So Florence could have had one in theory. There were only 3 cities in Boone. Covington had one, so Covington had a primary. Turnout will be abysmal up there. Ohio had a different primary date. We always have abysmal turnout in primaries. We'll have great turnout in the fall. But in our primaries, it'll be probably the lowest in the state.
So I do want to involve the other two on the panel, just as you see some of these results that are coming in with these, we won't call them liberty, but insurgent candidates against establishment candidates. What do you read into what we're seeing so far, Kelsey?
Really, from my seat, when I'm thinking about these Republican races, I've been thinking about the story of tonight really being what version of extremism do I think that we're going to get? So are we going to get sort of the run-of-the-mill folks who are backing extreme abortion bans or undermining public education, or are we going to get people that are way further right and definitely out of the mainstream? And I think we've already sort of alluded to this, that race has been in the gutter for a while. And so I think, it's been an interesting one to watch, and that one is, again, indicative of, are the Liberty candidates going to be insurgents, across the state, or is this a one-off?
Bob?
Well, 2 years ago, Northern Kentucky lost 3 significant incumbents who were committee chairs, and Massey was one of those. He was popular, got a lot done. Resumes don't count that much anymore. We're more in an anger moment in a lot of respects. Northern Kentucky is an enviable economy, a terrific region. And for me, just personally, just working there and having family there and growing family there, with Thayer, the majority leader, out, and he had a piece of Kenton, that's a loss for the region for sure. He worked hard in Northern Kentucky. Schickel, too, a committee chair, retiring, both those retirements. The 3 from before, and now where things stand, Northern Kentucky's lost ground in terms of clout and impact. And given the extent of that economic success, one of the better regions in the country, really, Northern Kentucky deserves it and will be sometime building it back. These new people will have to work overtime to catch up and make sure Northern Kentucky is represented as it has been.
You agree with that, Al Cross?
Well, I think that's right. And we have to wait and see just how much these insurgent candidates are interested in producing the traditional kinds of things that legislators have delivered. Do they really care about the Chamber of Commerce agenda? A lot of them don't.
But don't they?
But they could come around to it.
The ones who were the insurgent lawmakers, don't they vote the Republican Party agenda 90% of the time already?
I would say a lot of times, but I think some of them come at it and they come to Frankfort in a very black and white view, right? And anybody who's been around Frankfort for a while knows if you want to be effective, if you want to deliver for your constituents, if you want to really find and focus on getting real solutions to move Kentucky forward, that, the black and white view of Frankfort, that's not reality. And so no bill is ever going to be 100% perfect. And so you'll see some of this group will vote against something because of one particular thing. And I don't fault them for that, right? But I think my hope is that depending on how this all shakes out tonight, if whether or not the Liberty Party, which I kind of think has just become more of a brand that they're sticking to, it's loosely defined, but I hope that some of them are actually coming to Frankfort to figure out how to govern and figure out how to be good teammates, good caucus members, and learn how to work with the rest of the caucus.
So we're going to go now to our June Leffler, who is in Louisville. She is with Joe Zonka, who is the Enterprise State House reporter for Kentucky Public Radio, Louisville Public Media. Jim, it's yours.
We got this.
Thanks, Renee. I'm at Louisville Public Media. As you can see, the CD library is behind me, and I'm with Joe Zonka. Joe, thanks for coming today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
So we've heard a lot about the GOP races. We'll get into that. But as far as our Jefferson County races go, could you tell me more about Senate District 33? We know that's very interesting and incorporates the West End, Clifton, South End, downtown. What's cool about it?
Yeah, this is one of the most interesting Democratic primaries that we have. It's District 33. Senator Gerald Neal has represented this district since the 1980s, and there's a pretty clear contrast between him and his opponent, Attica Scott. Gerald Neal is someone who emphasizes bipartisanship, working with the Republican supermajority to get what they can, and Attica Scott is quite the opposite. She's kind of a firebrand. She's unabashedly progressive and believes in fighting Republicans when it's necessary. We don't have a lot of votes in Jefferson County yet, mostly just the early votes. The early vote, Gerald Neal had about twice as many votes as Attica Scott. He would certainly be the favorite, so we're going to see as the votes come in how that race shapes out.
Thank you. And another interesting race that's included in part of Jefferson County, but some other counties as well, Senate District 7. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Senate District 7 is the Republican primary, and that's where Adrian Southworth is the senator. And it's interesting that she is being opposed by the Senate Republican Caucus Campaign Committee, who is putting out ads for Ed Galrine, who is a farmer in Shelby County. And there's also Aaron Reed running. Aaron Reed, whether you want to call it Liberty or whatever, he's from that wing of the party, which is also the same wing as Adrian Southworth. So you had competing PACs from that wing of the GOP, one supporting Reed, one supporting Southworth, and then you had more of the establishment supporting Ed Galrine. The early votes showed that Aaron Reed's looking to be in a pretty good spot right now. He actually won Anderson County, which is the home county of Adrian Southworth. Reed and Gallurine were dead even in Shelby County. So it really comes up to that sliver of eastern Jefferson County where there's about 10,000 registered Republicans. So Gallurine needs to have a big margin there, or it looks like Aaron Reed's going to win that one.
Okay, a tough race for the incumbent. Now, let's talk more about the GOP races. We've been hearing a lot about it back at the studio. You've been covering the spending that's happening in the GOP state house races. Tell me more about these political action committees and who they're backing. How are they spending their money?
Yeah, it's really, the PACs really follow along the same line of whether you want to call them establishment Republicans, the ones who have kind of the power right now, or the insurgent or liberty Republicans. The biggest spending was on the establishment side, where a PAC called Commonwealth Conservative Coalition spent around $1 million helping about 9 Republican candidates. They gave a lot of money late to Kim Moser in Northern Kentucky. It looks like Kim Moser just barely held on by less than 90 votes in her race. She was facing Karen Campbell, and PACs backing her were hitting Kim Moser with ads for her vote against the anti-trans bill from 2023, and some remarks she made on the floor voting against that, saying we're not complete Neanderthals in Kentucky. So they had a lot of attack ads against her, but Commonwealth Conservative Coalition was one of the PACs that came in trying to back her at the very end, and it looks like they might have just helped her scrape by her teeth.
Okay. So this spending is, getting into some dirty ads as well. Yeah. And before I let you go, Joe, even though we'll be back with him later tonight, could you tell us just a little bit about House District 40? We've got the incumbent, Nima Kulkarni, with the Democratic caucus. That race has been tied up in the courts. Where does it stand now?
So right now, the primary can proceed as it is. And it's really going to, after the votes are counted, it's going to go straight to the Kentucky Supreme Court. They're going to be briefs filed. There's going to be an oral argument in early June to see whether Kulkarni is disqualified as a candidate or not. When she filed her election papers, she had a Republican sign one of the papers. State law says it has to be 2 Democrats in order to be in the Democratic primary. So it looks like Nima Kulkarni is likely going to have more votes tonight. The question is whether they are actually going to count, and that's going to be up to the Kentucky Supreme Court.
Joe, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Renee, back to you.
Thank you. June and Joe, sounds like a talk show. We'll be back with you in the next hour. So Al Cross, I want to come to you. Let's kind of break down a little bit of what we heard June and Joe talk about. Let's talk about the state Senate District number 33. And when we talk about insurgent candidates, we've talked about them primarily on the GOP side of things. But does that apply in the Senate District 33, and which one is the insurgent candidate there?
Attica Scott is obviously the insurgent, and she probably would like to be called an insurgent because she is. One of the arguments against some of these folks are that they are there to make a point, not to make a difference. I think Attica Scott would say she's there to make a difference, not just a point. She has run a number of races for Congress and but now for the legislature, and we can expect to see her remain active in politics. I think she has a following that's clearly true, and Gerald Neal has less of his career in front of him than he has behind him.
Mm-hmm. Attica Scott could run again for something, even this seat in 4 years.
Yeah. Well, and she's been on the ballot several times. She was in city council, Metro Council as they call it there. So she's a familiar name, of course, in that district and in the city, period.
Yeah, to that point, whenever she filed, I thought, that's 2 names that people know, and that's could sort of maybe even the playing field. But Gerald Neal raised $92,000, and it looks like on Attica's last report, she raised $28,000. So I'm sure also there was significant media spent. I'm sure on Senator Neal's side that helped his case to just drive home, that he's proven and effective in those messages that they were putting out there.
So while you're talking, let's talk about House District number 40 with Nima Kulkarni. That was the last item that June and Joe spoke about. So this is not going to be decided tonight by the voters, but by the Kentucky State Supreme Court.
Right. Yeah, I actually was just catching up on Joe's article where he was writing about that yes, to see what was going to happen. And so it seems like all the votes are going to be counted, of course, and then the Supreme Court will be the final decision maker on if she is going to continue to be eligible or not.
Okay, so let's talk about, there's some close races out across in the northern Kentucky area and in western Kentucky.
You have
Start with
two
Mosier.
important House committee chairs who have apparently or probably survived on close calls tonight. Joe Sonka mentioned Kim Mosier, who's chair of the House Health Committee. Really a hard-working legislator who has tried to get a lot of things done. Was the sponsor of the Momnibus bill this time that did a lot of things for mothers and their children.
This is House District 64.
House District 64. I'm sorry, folks. I have to remember to mention the district first for our crew. She made that unfortunate comment that Joe mentioned, and she was actually punished by the House leadership for that comment. But she bounced back and has been a good soldier. And for those of us who've been around in Kentucky politics for a long time, we probably need to note that she is the daughter of Dr. Floyd Poore, who was Transportation Secretary and ran for governor back in the 80s and then for Congress later on. Then in Western Kentucky, we have the Richard Heath race. He's chair of the Agriculture Committee, ahead by maybe 1% of the vote. That one will probably go to a recount.
Yeah, and it may be, the latest info that I've gotten from somebody out there is that he may have actually slid into being down by a few votes.
Yeah,
so
I'm hearing
not everything's been
The
reported.
McCracken County vote is coming in now.
Yeah, it's neck and neck from what I'm hearing.
That is
down
largely
there.
a Graves County district.
Right.
I think it's like 4 McCracken precincts and all of the Graves.
Yep.
So why is it so close?
There are a lot of hyper-local, very personal issues that have entered the chat on this race down there. A lot of them go back to a car accident that occurred with Richard Heath's wife and granddaughter, and then some local people that were involved in that race or tried to be in that car accident. Some lawsuits that have occurred.
So hyper-local.
Hyper-local and very personal. So things that aren't going to spill over into other races. And so you've seen a lot of money be spent. It's gotten very personal. I would say Kim Holloway, the opponent down there, has lodged a lot of personal attacks daily on social media, whether it be in mail or otherwise. There has been some spending and support, some outside spending in support of Richard. At the end of the day, I think that Richard, while he has ran for, agriculture commissioner, and but I think people like him. He is a business owner down there. But this hyper-local issue with these lawsuits has caused him some trouble down there.
Yeah.
Al Cross, real quick.
It looks like he has lost. 99% of the vote counted, probably all the vote counted. Kim Holloway has 52.7%, and Richard Heath has 47.3%.
A couple other things on Heath. He ran twice for Commissioner of Agriculture against Ryan Quarles and most recently against Jonathan Schell, and both of those were the favored candidates by the ag community. So there's some, I think he was, even though he was ag committee chair, I think that was a little bit. And going back to Mosier for a second, one of the challenges she had is that it was her first real primary since she got there. Her background on a personal level, she was the first drug czar in northern Kentucky, and her district is Independence, Taylor Mill, Edgewood, a little bit of Erlanger. It's an odd-shaped district. So it was her first time running in this new district after redistricting. The woman she ran against, Campbell, was as a member of the Kenton County Republican Executive Committee. So she's an insurgent who's also part of the establishment. And it was, pretty close race. Mosier had way more money, but, her opponent had a ground game, was a member of a big church in the district. Her husband, somebody even told me, her husband's a handyman. He's probably been in half the houses in the district, and people like him. And so these things, Amy used the term hyper-local to describe the Heath Holloway race. You have some of that. And again, turnout was pretty low in northern Kentucky because, as we talked about earlier, there's just not a lot on the ballot, plus a history of not voting in primaries.
Yeah, Bob.
If resumes count, and we're seeing more and more that they don't, the Mosier race shouldn't have been close. She's done transformative, highly recognized, legacy-making things, public health transformation for public health in the state, hailed by Columbia University researchers as a model for the nation. Just one example. Heath, too, with the state match for federal funding that will probably produce, if this works like it seems to be, $1.5 billion of federal money that would not have come otherwise. So these are strong resumes, strong leaders, but that's not factoring in like it did in the old days.
Right, yeah. And it's hard to sell that, right, to message that in a positive way or in a way that connects with voters. We have just understood that the Associated Press has called, is it the District 61? Savannah Maddox will return. So Savannah Maddox.
She's my state rep. I live in this district.
Okay, you live in this district.
I live in 61st.
Okay,
I
this
change
includes
every
part
10
of
years.
Boone, Gallatin, Grant, Kenton, part of Kenton. Yeah.
They redistrict me every 10 years.
Right.
So, now
just for you, right?
No, just for me. So this is a rematch from 2 years ago, and I'll tell you somebody who lives in this district. I never heard from Likens. You know, last 2 years ago, he knocked on my door. We got a mail piece or two. The only candidate I heard from was Maddox. We got mail from her. We got nothing from Likens, and so this margin doesn't surprise me, because if you didn't know anything, you wouldn't even know that she had a real race, because it was just all positive mail pieces from her and positive communications. And so, but yeah, this is my district.
Well,
yeah,
okay.
This was never a primary that was on anybody's race to really worry about. I think that Savannah had this locked up a while ago.
All right, so Laura, our Laura Rogers, who's in Bowling Green, she's there now, and she's with the Warren County Republican Party chair. Laura?
All right. Thank you so much, Renee. Timothy Gilliam is chair of the Warren County Republican Party. And Timothy, I want to ask you about the role of the county parties in these primary elections as the state does become more polarized. We're seeing a lot of the general elections being uncontested in some of these races. So what do you feel like is going to be the direction of the Republican Party in these primaries moving forward?
Well, that's a good question. You know, the role of the Republican Party of Kentucky is to make sure that Republicans win in November. And so primaries are good, they're important, they're a critical part of our democratic process. They strengthen our candidates to have that spirited discussion. But at the end of the day, it ought to be the voters that decide who represents the Republican Party, not a small group of people with their thumb on the scale that are picking whichever candidate passed their own litmus test. And so it really should be up to the voters.
Well, I know here in Warren County, you've been paying close attention to the 19th District House seat, and incumbent State Representative Michael Meredith, been in that office since 2011, challenged by Kelsey Rock. And from what I understand so far, Meredith is ahead in the numbers that we're seeing in the returns. But you all opted not to endorse a candidate in this House race. You remained neutral. Is that one of the reasons why you didn't want the party to become, I think the word you've used with me is factionalized?
Yeah, well, you know, I think it's, we didn't endorse either candidate. They had a spirited discussion, but I can guarantee you this. The Republican Party of Warren County is stronger tonight for not having endorsed either candidate and for letting that process play out and letting voters make the decision as to who is going to represent them moving forward. And so that's the approach that we'll continue to take. It's the approach that the state party will continue to take. And, you know, I think there's going to be at least a race or maybe two tonight where a county party has endorsed a losing candidate. And so when that happens, I think it makes our job that much more difficult. We've got to stay united. We can't become factionalized. And when the party apparatus starts wading into these fights, the only person it helps are Democrats.
Do you have concerns with the GOP having a supermajority in the state legislature, yet there is some discontent apparently in the Republican Party? You have the Liberty, I think, insurgent candidates that we're hearing, you all refer to it tonight, Patriot Republicans. The fact that they are challenging the mainstream, the establishment, does that give you any concern?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the voters are going to decide who represents the Republican Party. And as the county, whether we're talking about the county party or the state party, we're going to support whoever our voters send to represent us in November. And so this whole conversation about, which wing of the party you come from is really irrelevant from the party's perspective, because after the primary, we all have got to come together, coalesce, and make sure that we have a successful November.
And what are going to be some of the top priorities that you anticipate for the Republican Party moving into the next legislative session?
Well, that's a good question. And, there will be a spirited conversation among our state legislators from across the state, including the ones that are victorious in November. and they'll start to put together their priorities for the next legislative session. There will be spirited discussions in Frankfort, just like there's been spirited discussions in these primaries all across the state.
Thank you so much, Timothy Gilliam, chair of the Warren County Republican Party. We appreciate your perspective tonight so much. Renee, we'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Timothy. And now we're on a different set in the same studio, and we're having a reprise of last night a little bit with two of the folks who are with us on Kentucky Tonight. We've got Jared Smith, who's with Piper Smith, and Trey Watson, who's with Capital Reigns PR. You see them often on Fridays for our segment Inside Kentucky Politics. You guys are really inside on all of this, and so let's just talk real quickly, Trey, about different Trey, we should say. It's the different spelling.
The right spelling.
The right spelling, T-R-E-S. You hear that? You hear that, Grayson?
Nobody spells it that way.
Tell us about turnout, how do you interpret what the turnout is, and who we see as insurgent candidates who are becoming victorious tonight.
It's low. It's incredibly low across the state, and part of that's there's no kind of eye-catching race on top of the ticket, and it's expensive to motivate voters. That's a lot of advertisement. That people are busy. It's the end of the school year. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it's expensive to get on air and make sure that people know there's even an election coming up. And so when you have low turnout like it was today, it tends to favor the kind of more extremes of the party, because the people who are to the extremes, they're excited, they're engaged, they're in on it. It's what they're living and breathing. Your rank and file regular run-of-the-mill voters, they're not checking Facebook and commenting on stuff and on Twitter every day. And so when you have low turnouts like this, apathy feeds extremism in both parties. The lower turnout, the more you see the extreme candidates make their way through primaries.
But in the case of the Democrats, we were just talking just a moment ago, and you heard it, Jared, about Senate District 33 with well-heeled incumbent Gerald Neal, who was up against Attica Scott, who's made a failed attempt for Congress, who was a former state rep, and even Al was talking about how she could be considered the insurgent candidate on the Democratic side. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, you could say that. We asked the question last night, Louisville voters ready for a change when it came to Senator Neal and former Rep. Mary Lou Marzin, and Louisville voters spoke loudly and clearly they are not. They are not ready for a change.
Mary Lou Marzin, how's that looking?
They called it for her.
Called it for her,
yeah.
Okay.
So that was surprising. We thought Adams would put up a little bit more of a fight. And so, but you're seeing, low turnout, the establishment, especially establishment Republicans, and a hat tip to Al Cross for getting rid of Liberty candidates and adding insurgent candidates, because that desperately needed to be done. You needed the best possible scenario, and the best possible scenario for traditional Republicans was high turnout. And they didn't get it, and we're seeing, looks like Killian's lost, to Thomas Jefferson. T.J. Roberts' wins going away. I mean, and everybody knows who he is. I mean, it's well documented what kind of person this man is. And so just low turnout brings this. So
remind us about this House District 66, Ed Massey and T.J. Roberts. And T.J. Roberts was successful tonight.
T.J. Roberts ran a very effective campaign. He was aggressive. He ran a textbook campaign, regardless of what's on his resume that may make him objectionable to a lot of mainstream voters. He ran a very good campaign. And Ed Massey ran a very odd campaign. I would say it's probably one of the worst state house campaigns I've seen run. He should have been running as the grown-up in the room, as we don't need this kid who says crazy stuff on Twitter. We need an adult presence, and instead he got right down there in the gutter with him. They sent out a piece of mail at the very end that said he's going to kick the snot out of liberals. I don't know what lane he was trying to choose, because he wasn't going to out crazy and out right-wing T.J. Roberts. So I'm not sure what his point of running for if he wasn't going to run to be a sane adult presence.
And Trey and I talked about this when we saw that mailer. It's like he's running 3 campaigns at once. There's no way you're going to win a campaign.
So he was just trying to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what would stick.
That's not a winnable strategy.
So the winnable strategy would have been what? Stick to a main message, be the adult in the room?
I don't know that there was a winnable strategy in the end. Yeah, with the margins and the low turnout, although I think there was more votes cast in that race than there was 2 years ago. I'd have to go back and look, but I think T.J. Roberts ran a very good campaign. He is a professional operative. He knows what he's doing.
Congressman Massey had come out for him. Did that have any weight at all, you think?
They ran I just think TJ ran a good campaign. He knew who his voters were. He worked hard at him, and he got him out to the polls, and Ed Massey clearly didn't.
So we've got a little while to go before we get through all of these races and talk about who won, who lost. But what does this kind of bode for the 2025 legislative session as you see who could be going to the state capitol when the session starts?
Well, I'm sure the speaker is pouring an extra bourbon right now. We'll see. You know, it just depends. You know, I thought the article where it's the so-called insurgent candidates kind of thumped their chest in the Herald Leader, Austin Horn, about how they were able to hold leadership hostage over some legislative pieces. So it looks like there's going to be more of that. So we'll see.
Yeah. How do you think he's going to be able to hold his ground, or will he be able to hold his ground? And could he possibly face some challenge when they meet in the organizational session?
We'll have to see, because the question is, when you nominate extreme candidates in a primary, what happens in a general election that's probably going to have a much higher turnout, a totally different electorate base? And you're talking about Boone, and you're talking about Fayette County, you're talking about suburban districts that Republicans are having trouble with nationwide.
So could Democrats come in and take those seats?
I mean, I think if what holds in the 45th, I think the Democrat has a great chance in the fall.
And I can say Democrats keep crowing at me that Northern Kentucky is eventually going to start going more purple. You know, I don't. Is this T.J. Roberts the sort of candidate that they could potentially pick off? I don't know. Boone County's so conservative, but I wouldn't be surprised if Democrats make a play at it.
Trey, I've been waiting 20 years for Northern Kentucky suburbs to go purple.
And purple meaning what, though? I mean,
that's a swing area.
Mixed ballots.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. We appreciate having you on, and we'll come back to you a little later on tonight.
Great.
Appreciate you. And right now, we want to go and show you, just for a couple of minutes, full screens of the results as we have them in the key congressional races that are being contested and some of the key state houses races that are being contested. Stay with us. We got more election coverage coming up. Thank you. You are watching KET's coverage of primary election 2024. I'm Renee Shaw. We have a panel of expert political pundits and observers and journalists who are here with us both at this side of the studio and across the side. And we've also got some folks who are joining us in different locations across the state, in Bowling Green and Louisville, and we'll be checking back in with them. So thank you so much for making KET your choice tonight for most comprehensive election coverage there is around. So let's talk about, we just got through talking to the other Trey, and who misspells his name, Trey Grayson. And and Jared Smith about particularly Boone County, that 66 House district. Talk to us about the turnout there.
So I was just looking at the State Board of Elections website, which now has a lot of the counties in the Eastern Time Zone uploaded at 100%. So you can really dive in to see turnout percentages. And I always do the caveat, primary turnout percentage is tricky because you've got independents and Democrats in there. That being said, you can look at the percentages. Boone was about 14% turnout. Boone's very, very Republican. Kenton County was about 9%. And in those races, you had like the Mosier race, for example, and Kenton was only like 3,000 votes cast in that race. And if you look in the scroll in the bottom, like I was watching, actually the one that's up right now, this, you look at some of these Eastern Kentucky districts, how many more people are voting, and you only have the 3,000. So the turnout was low as expected, and that means a different kind of electorate. The other thing that I think is worth noting about Boone County, we haven't talked about this yet, is the Boone County Republican Party endorsed a bunch of candidates and sent a mailer out, not only saying this is who we're for, they attacked in the mailer their other candidates. So basically all these Boone County candidates who won tonight were all on the endorsement side of this ledger in this mailer that the county party spent.
But isn't that unprecedented or unusual, let's say?
It is unusual, and it is probably unprecedented, because it's one thing to endorse, but it's also, I think the unusual part is the attacking members of your own party. Now, when you have 80 members in the House and 31 in the Senate, you know, you're going to have some of these feuds. I mean, we were talking in the green room before about the factions in the Democratic Party, you know, decades ago. So this happens. But yeah, that was an unprecedented thing. And it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because folks who sponsored a table at the Boone County Christmas party are like, well, I don't want my money going against other Republicans.
But Jessamine County also did that. The Republican Party and over Timoney, they had sent out a pretty strong admonition about his vote on SB 150 in favor of TJ Roberts. So
they did, and we're actually
contagious?
Watching some of those votes come in. The votes in Lexington seem to be coming in a little bit slower than we would probably like to see them come in, but it does look like, at least very early numbers, Thomas Jefferson, I don't know if those are early votes, if those are some absentee votes, but it does look like Thomas Jefferson has a little bit of a lead there over Timoney in House District 45. This has been probably one of, if not the most expensive House races that we've seen. A combination of candidate spending, a lot of outside spending in this race. This race, again, got very personal, went after some of Representative Timoney's past votes, which he can defend all day long and are probably the right fit for that district. And I think that's important to remember. That district is really out in the suburbs of Lexington, and so
it's not the Stan Lee district.
Correct. It's not the same district that it used to be.
Yeah,
and I think that's
Kelsey,
important to remember.
can you add to that?
I was just going to say that one is one to watch. I think it was already one to watch if we thought that Representative Timoney was going to be in there and be in that seat in the general election, but. Obviously, that totally changes the game if he gets beat tonight, because Adam Moore is a great candidate on the Democratic side.
Who is Adam Moore?
So Adam Moore, his slogan, he likes to say, "Kentucky deserves more." I like that. That's why I'm saying it on here. But he also likes to say he pursued service in suit and in uniform. And so he has experience in D.C. He was in the service and now is a business owner. But he's out there knocking on doors and has been super active. And so, like I said, that one was already going to be one to watch on the Democratic side. But now that dynamic is going to change, I'd say that could be a potential flip for sure.
I'd heard from House leadership that this is one that they would be very concerned about losing if Timoney lost re-election in that primary, lost the primary, excuse me.
So you heard Jared Smith say that perhaps Speaker David Osborne is having an extra bourbon tonight. You think he is?
You know what? We're still got some more results to come in. I mean, I think we haven't yet written or spoken about the big story. You haven't asked the headline. Your wrap-up question.
I always ask that toward the end.
I mean, because I think one of the things that's going on is some of this is how much of this is Boone County, Northern Kentucky. Like 2 years ago, there was all that insurgency, but it was really contained in Northern Kentucky. And how much of this? Timoney does seem to be having some issues. And how much of it's also, if you asked earlier, on the Democratic side, we're seeing some challenges there. So. Low turnout, angst with voters. If you got 80, now you have 78. That's still a pretty big number that Speaker Osborne can work with. And if I'm him, there's some of these races I think would have liked to have gone the other way. But they were able to bolster a lot of these incumbents in some of these races and push them across the finish line.
But we haven't seen any Liberty or insurgent candidates or whatever we're calling them these days. We haven't seen them flip a seat yet. I think that's important to remember. These are all holds. When you look at Proctor, Doan, Maddox, T.J. Roberts, that's a hold in that open seat.
They're about to flip Kemeny.
Rayburn, right? But I think the majority of these have been holds. So now, if the majority of those, you know, of the incumbents being challenged were flipped, then I think we'd have something to really reassess, right? But I think at this point in the night, you know, is Speaker Osborne worried or having an extra bourbon? I would say no. You're watching a couple races to see where they come in. But I think it's important to remember that these races where Liberty candidates held their seats, those are holds. They know they're known entities to the Republican caucus.
I think you're right.
Now.
I think 45 might be the only one so far that you might say is now in play in a way. Where the Democratic chances have been enhanced by the winner of that primary this year. Now, maybe in the future, you know, maybe in 2 years or 4 years with a different set of candidates. But this year, you're still looking at holds.
I think we need to explore just why Killian Timoney got into trouble. I think he got into trouble because he voted his conscience. You know, he couldn't abide Senate Bill 150 and what it did to gay people. And he's been made to suffer for it, partly because he also sponsored the bill to outlaw grape machines. And the people who want to operate grape machines have helped finance Thomas Jefferson, his opponent. So there's a combination of factors there. But with 41% of the votes counted, Jefferson is ahead by 75 to 25.
Conscience-like resumes, a troubled concept. Vote with the team, no exceptions. Now, when we were, at least in my generation, growing up, conscience was a different factor for a John Sherman Cooper, a Thurston B. Morton, other people during that era who served well in the U.S. Senate for Kentucky. This presents a problem that will have to have much further analysis.
Yeah, the voters trusted John Sherman Cooper when he was one of the more liberal Republicans in the Senate because he generally voted in Kentucky's interest and their interest, and he still seemed like one of them. But I'm afraid people in these legislative districts just do not have the useful knowledge of who the heck their representatives are that they used to.
Right, no awareness.
Yeah. So let's talk about a few other races. We haven't gotten to a couple of these. House District 49, I don't know if we've talked about that one yet, so let's go there, if we can put that on the screen.
Oh, Thomas Huff.
Okay, so let's talk about this race here. Any surprises here?
No surprise here. Representative Thomas Huff worked his tail off in this race. He's a really fun follow on Facebook. If you were not friends with him on Facebook.
Why is he fun follow?
He is just a hoot, honestly.
He is funny
so if you need a giggle every now and then, he's one to follow. But he is one that truly listens to his constituents, and you see that play out in the General Assembly. His questioning in committees, his questions on the floor, they truly are because constituents have reached out to him and want more info on whatever that vote may be. But I think he has been working day in and day out, and so this was no surprise.
So House District 62, this is part of Scott County. This seat vacated by Philip Pratt.
Oh yes,
who've been there for some time. So here are the results of that race. Any surprises here?
No, we were joking off the air that Damon Thayer had a good night because the two races he cared the most about was Matt Nunn and Tony Hampton, and both won pretty comfortably.
So what's the background of Tony Hampton?
Well, you know, law enforcement, you see that.
He's the sheriff. He's the current sheriff.
So he's been on the ballot, right?
Yeah.
So when he got in this race, we kind of all knew it was over.
Right.
Yeah.
Just because of the background.
Yeah.
That's right.
So 86, let's go down to House District number 86. This is Knox and part of Laurel County. Tom Smith, Billy Baylor, Tom the incumbent.
So this is one, you know, Odell, everybody calls him Odell.
Odell, right.
Yeah, you know, I think this is his second or third term. It's probably his first real race as a primary. So, you know, there was some level of concern just given everything that's going on in the air that we've been talking about. But he took the race really seriously and ended up, you know, winning by a pretty nice margin, which is, you know, kudos to him.
Kelsey, I want to go to you and talk about a House District race, Democrat. Mary Lou Marzian making a comeback here.
Yeah.
Talk to us about this race.
Yeah, I said earlier that I thought that the story on the Democratic side that I'd be really watching is it sort of this new leaders or the tried and true and it looks like that she's obviously pulled it out. But I have to say kudos to Rick Adams, because I know that their team knocked over 8,000 doors, and as a first-time candidate, he raised $65,000, and they were putting out on social media and things that it was a lot of course, small dollar donors and young folks that were contributing into his campaign. Something I just noticed, however, though, his name on the ballot is William Adams, but a lot of his signs and things said Rick. I don't know, maybe Mail and other media that they did, but I wonder if that also contributed. But of course, people have been used to voting for now or former Representative Marzian, and so that's a familiar name. And she was also out there pounding the pavement. So
she hasn't been gone that long.
That's right. I was going to say, give us the backstory on this. This seat was Representative Josie Raymond, who's now making a stab at Metro Council.
Yes.
But they kind of made a deal, right? Marzian, who had that seat before redistricting, gave it to Josie essentially, and so this is where we are.
Yeah, so she was gone for just one term, and then whenever Representative Raymond said she's running for Metro Council, Mary Lou said she was going to put her name back in the ring, I guess, and yeah, she looks like she's pulling it out tonight.
All right, so now let's head back to Bowling Green, where we have our Laura Rogers, who is on scene now with Wes Switek, who is with Bowling Green Daily News. Take it away, Laura.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, we are live at the Warren County Courthouse, and Wes, your reporter Justin Story inside the courthouse watching those election returns as they come in there in the county clerk's office, and we've been following his X account to see those results. Is it about what you anticipated, what we're seeing tonight?
Yeah, you know, not a super high turnout, not a whole lot of races that are really contested, especially in the primary. So, you know, the estimates have been varying 20%, 30%, so that's probably what we're going to see. So not a super high turnout. We do have a couple of races locally that have drawn some interest in the primary, but certainly not a full slate, and not what we're probably going to see in November when we have some interesting races on the ballot, including a mayoral race here in Bowling Green.
Yes, that one already getting attention even in this primary election cycle. And the 19th District House race on the ballot today, which covers all of Edmonson County and then part of Warren County, and that's been the one we've been talking quite a bit about, and incumbent State Representative Michael Meredith ahead in those returns. You all did extensive coverage of that race, talking to both candidates. Both candidates faced some controversy. They got a little nasty, I guess we could say, with the campaigning.
Yeah, you know, every campaign, even if they don't do it or they do it through surrogates, tries to bring up some of the negative issues about the other candidate. But Michael Meredith, who's now actually the longest-serving state legislator from this area, running for re-election against a businessman named Kelsey Rock, and Meredith had a huge advantage, of course, in name recognition, finances, quite a bit more. He's actually got a lot of PAC money as well against Rock, who's kind of more self-financed. And right now it looks like Meredith is pretty much running away with that seat, which is not unexpected. And there is no Democrat running for that seat. So whoever wins that seat will be the representative for that seat.
Yeah, your reporter Sarah Michaels writing today that I believe over $100,000 spent on that race, one of the most expensive in the state.
And the vast majority was from Meredith. He had quite a bit of money. That's one of the benefits of incumbency is the name recognition, of course, as well as then you get a lot of donations, you know, and a lot of PAC money comes in, and that's across the board for, you know, usually the incumbents or the folks that people are betting on to win. So, yeah, he had a huge advantage. One of the more expensive races, but a vast majority of that is from the Meredith side.
Do we usually see PACs spend that much money in a primary election?
You know, it depends. Again, the incumbents sometimes will see that. I'm sure there's been times where, you know, there's been more. You know, it's a little bit unusual because I think for the most part people would think that seat was safe, that Rock was not a super difficult challenger for him to take on. But you know, I guess a lot of the times these PACs have money, so they got to spend it, so they might as well spend it where they think they're going to get the payoff.
I want to ask you, too, about House Seat 20, District 20, which was held for 45 years by Speaker of the House Jody Richards, a Democrat. He was succeeded by State Representative Patty Minter, who served 2 terms. Then she was ousted by Kevin Jackson, State Representative Jackson running unopposed in the primary. He will run opposed again in November. So to have a Republican now in that seat, or is that an interesting change of pace for you?
Yeah, well, and of course that happened in the last election. But yeah, that seat, even before Jody Richards and his 4-decade career as that state representative, was always held by Democrats, and that seat was basically a Bowling Green seat. And Republicans have long had their eye on that seat, spent a lot of money, even though the last few times that Jody Richards ran, they put up candidates with a lot of financial backing behind them, but Jody kept winning those seats fairly easily. Then he retired, and Patty Minter, professor at Western, won that seat. And then finally, what happened is that Bowling Green was split into 3 districts, basically, to basically dilute the heavy Democratic voter majority in Bowling Green, and it worked. Patty was defeated for re-election by Kevin Jackson, and the demographics of that, having Bowling Green split into 3 ways, that'll probably be a safe Republican seat for as long as we, unless the seat gets, again, redistricted or back to where it was, which of course probably won't happen, that'll probably be a Republican seat. So yeah, it's one of the ironies that Bowling Green, the 3rd largest city, doesn't really have a representative that is just representing Bowling Green in the state house.
I do also want to ask you about the Commonwealth's attorney race that we see in the 49th Circuit that is in Simpson and Allen counties. We see the incumbent being challenged in that race. Again, no Democratic challenger. This will just be a Republican race.
Yeah, Corey Morgan, he's seeking a 2nd term for the Commonwealth's attorney position there, and he's going against a gentleman by the name Mike Lindsay, who is a Commonwealth's attorney for the other circuit here in Warren and Edmonson County. Don't have results on that, but that's one of the few other sort of contested races in the primary.
Earlier, Warren County Clerk Lynette Yates said turnout in Warren County today was about 13%, maybe just a hair over that. Does that surprise you? Do you think that we'll see voters become more motivated to come out for primaries as, again, so many of the general elections are now uncontested? I mean, half of these House seats are uncontested in November.
Yeah, I mean, I don't recall this many uncontested races in a primary. Usually it seems like there's people, coming out of the woodwork very often. You have so many candidates, you can't keep track of them. Certainly, there's just the fact that there's so few contested races has, hurt turnout quite a bit. I think it depends. If we see more candidates or issues on the ballots and things like that, but of course you won't have that in a primary, this might be more par for the course. Again, you just seem to have less and less contested races in general, and so, I'm expecting pretty good turnout in November for a lot of reasons, but yeah, I think for primaries it might be par for the course.
Wes, we sure appreciate your insight and perspective. Thank you so much. I think we can all agree these primaries are becoming more consequential, right, as we do see more incumbents being challenged and seats up for grabs. So thank you so much. Good talking with you here live at the Warren County Courthouse. That does it for us in Bowling Green. Renee, we'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Laura, for your excellent coverage and your questions. And Wes Switek, thank you for being with us tonight. Appreciate it so very much. So let's kind of distill more about what Laura was talking about. We want to start with that House District 19. This is State Representative Michael Meredith. He had a challenger, Kelsey Rock. This was a very interesting race that got a little bit in the gutter at times. Talk to us about this, Amy Wycliffe.
It did. I think this was the first race in this primary cycle where we saw the group Make Liberty Win kind of enter the fray. Of course, they participated in other races as well. They participated in the last cycle. Really slinging mud right out of the gate. Honestly telling straight up false lies about Chairman Michael Meredith, who has done a tremendous job for his district, has delivered a lot for his district. Funding for that Veterans Center down there, nursing home, done a really good job. I know he himself has been pounding the pavement. I think he and his volunteers, he had a dedicated group of volunteers helping him, and I think they knocked, between 5,000 and 6,000 doors, which is a lot for that area down in the Edmonson County area. Looks tonight like he is going to have hopefully a successful night. I think it's also important to know that his opponent, I think, had a court date today. On election day, right? He was behind in his child support. He had a record of having a protective order issued of him because his ex-wife was scared for her life and feared for her safety. And I think that speaks volumes about people. So,
and Meredith, of course, was implicated in the scandal that brought down Speaker Jeff Hoover. And he's really the survivor of that. He's worked really hard to serve his constituency and be a good member of the House. And the final results show that he got 76% of the vote.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, we haven't said that. When you get that much in a primary, like, that's a really strong accomplishment. And I think, again, but the other thing about Meredith is he hadn't had a primary opponent in a long time, and his district over the years has become more Warren County centric as Warren County's population has grown. He's from Edmonson County originally. It's funny, he's still pretty young, but he's been in office for a long time because he started like a little pup on city council in Brownsville and got elected, like 2010 maybe. It's been a while, but he's still at a pretty young age. Yeah. But that, like with Mosier, the first time you have a primary in this new, in your newish district, in this environment, it can be a real challenge. But he dispatched with ease.
Well, and I think they threw everything they had at him.
Yeah.
And so I think this will really speak volumes headed into future election cycles.
So just a little, not spoiler alert, but Laura Rogers is efforting an interview with Representative Meredith here in just a moment. So we're going to come to her when they're all mic'd up and ready to go. But let's talk about that Commonwealth's attorney race that you heard Laura and Wes Switek mention, the 49th Circuit. Let's talk about this race here. You go, Trey Grayson.
Which
Commonwealth's attorney, or
no, you want the 14th.
The 14th.
Yeah, the 14th.
14th is Simpson and Allen.
Is the big Commonwealth attorneys race. That's Woodford, Scott, and Bourbon. And there you have.
That's the one. Yeah.
Okay, I can talk about that one, but I don't know. I don't know that other one you're talking about.
You want to talk about Woodford, Scott, and Bourbon?
Yeah. Why you got it up? Yes.
According to the Herald Leader, this is partial results. Doesn't say how partial, but there's a lot of vote here. And Kelly Kearney, the main challenger, has 45%. Sharon Muse Johnson, the incumbent, has 33%. And Jack Keith Eardley has 22%.
So this is a go back from 2 years ago. So Johnson's, let's see, now husband ran for judge while she was the Commonwealth attorney, and he was running for a circuit judge. The Commonwealth attorney prosecutes in the circuit court. He ended up losing that race last year. And there was some fallout from that, and because she couldn't, there would have to be recusal. And how does the Commonwealth attorney, like all of the other judges would have had to cover it. So Kearney actually won all 3 counties, which is pretty impressive, pretty comfortably. And Trey, the other Trey, who doesn't know how to spell his name, is over here just, he's so happy right now that we're talking about this race and his candidate
something
won.
To do with that, huh?
But you had some issues, and normally these Commonwealth attorney races are not, high profile enough to talk about on KET.
Right.
But the voters in these 3 counties saw that and said, I want somebody who's not like that to be I want somebody else to be my Commonwealth attorney. We had a similar situation in Boone County 6 years ago with a similar conflict of interest and some ethical challenges. And Lewis Kelly ended up knocking off the incumbent pretty comfortably as well. And so kudos to the voters when they're presented with some of these races that are not the highest profile, but when they see a set of facts like, I don't feel comfortable with this, they will make a change.
Amy.
I think this is also a good point to see here is that Attorney General Russell Coleman endorsed Kelly Kearney. And so this was kind of a first test for his foray into endorsing Commonwealth attorneys across the state. And so,
I think he smelled a winner.
Yeah, I think he did. But I think that's to be noted, right? He didn't engage in all of them. And I think
I'd also like to say that the 3 counties in this circuit, this district, all have good newspapers. And the newspapers, as far as I can tell, did a good job of informing the voters about the issues involving Sharon Muse Johnson. And the voters made what appears to be the appropriate decision.
Kentucky's ambassador for local journalism, right there.
Even though he's emeritus, he'll always be.
He is the dean of Kentucky journalism, hands down. Real quickly before we go to Austin Horn, who's going to be joining us from the Lexington Herald Leader, Kelsey, I want to ask you about the Daniel Grossberg race. This is House District number 30. This is a nail biter, is it not?
Yes, it looks like it is a nail biter. This is one that I was hearing could be close, or people were worried about because signs were popping up in the district and all of that stuff. When you look at their, how much they raised, Representative Grossberg raised close to $90,000, and Mitra, his opponent, raised about half that, $44,000. But he is a teacher in JCPS, and I guess was working the doors because he is right there with him. It looks like that is less than 100 votes with about 90% in. So that one is going to go down to the wire. And I'm honestly,
he's ahead by about 100. right?
He's ahead, yes. Yeah, he's ahead by about 100. And I am really surprised at how close it is because, again, I always think of Representative Grossberg being more of a workhorse. You know, he's a good legislator. He communicates with constituents. He's knocking on doors. He's kind of doing all those things that you think that you should do. And so for it to be this close, I am surprised by this one. And it looks like it's going to be close.
All right. Anything else to care to add before we go to Austin Horn, who is joining us in the newsroom of Lexington Herald Leader? Good to see you, Austin. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Hoped you got your story in before the deadline. I'm sure you did. We'll look for it here in a bit.
Not exactly, but it'll be up soon.
It doesn't matter anymore.
It doesn't. Al Cross says it doesn't matter anymore. You're all online. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So what are you writing about? So what is the story that you're going to be pushing?
Yeah. Right now it's kind of up in the air, but I think the most consequential for the direction of state policy is this battle. And you guys have talked about it extensively, this battle between liberty Republicans, self-identifying liberty Republicans, and mainstream Republicans. Right now, it looks as though the numbers are going to shift just slightly towards liberty Republicans. I think Thomas Jefferson, I don't know if that race has been called. He has declared victory, and the numbers look... Thomas Jefferson was completely backed by liberty. This is in Representative Killian Timoney's district. A PAC that kind of backed these mainstream Republicans, spent more than $250,000 defending Timoney, and Jefferson just won by quite a bit. And that's a district that includes parts of southern Fayette County and parts of Jessamine County. It's kind of the Southland Christian Church corridor, if you will, along Nicholasville Road there. So that's been an interesting one to follow. It also looks like out west, Representative Richard Heath, who's the chair of the Agriculture Commission in the House, is in trouble. We'll see how the chips fall on that. I don't believe it's been called, but Kimberly Holloway, who ran as a write-in last time and is backed by kind of the liberty wing of the party this time, is in a good position, I think. But at the same time, we've had these pretty strong repudiations of liberty candidates, right? You guys were talking about Michael Meredith. He's somebody who's won by a lot in his South Central Kentucky district. So it's a mixed bag, but it looks like that coalition of kind of further right Republicans with some kind of roots in the liberty movement, in the libertarian movement, is gaining some ground within the Republican caucus.
So I know you've been busy, Austin, and may not have heard our earlier commentary, but Al Cross pointed out that maybe a better euphemism would be insurgent over liberty, and that liberty is kind of a nebulous term that is undefined. I mean, how do you define these types of candidates, whether they be insurgent or liberty candidates? What do they stand for? Who are they against? What are they against? Are they all pro-Trump? What is it about them that makes them fall into this liberty or insurgent category?
Yeah, I think insurgent is a totally fair way of thinking it. Liberty is just kind of the popular name, sort of what they call themselves, and what I think different media outlets like myself have called them before, because they are kind of united by this anger over the direction of the Republican Party in Kentucky. I think most people would say, and it's safe to say, that the direction of the state legislature is quite conservative. You have huge Republican majorities, but they want to push the conservatives who are in the driver's seat, namely House leadership, Senate leadership, further to the right on both issues that are near and dear to libertarians, so that includes state spending issues, and issues that are near and dear to social conservatives. So I don't see it so much as libertarian per se. It's kind of trying to bind together two parts of that conservative three-legged stool that Reagan talked about back in the day, of social conservatives and sort of freedom/liberty-oriented people, and it's working to some extent, but they still don't have a representative in leadership in those 10 spots who really call a lot of the shots in Frankfort.
So you think, or what do you glean from tonight's election results so far about how the 2025 legislative session could go, particularly for leadership? That first part of the session is organizational in nature, where they do decide leadership and chairmanships, et cetera. Do you think there'll be any upsets come January of 2025?
That's hard to say. I mean, there was one close leadership election last time around, and we'll see if the numbers in the House, and that was in the House in particular, if the numbers in the House kind of sway things at all. I think right now the status quo kind of, I think, still has the edge because, we talk a lot about Liberty legislators, but really there are only currently 8 or 9, depending on how you count it, who really openly identify that way. There are certainly people that they can try and bring closer to their cause. But I would say right now, in pole position is the current leadership regime, if you will, or the current members of leadership. But certainly coalitions can always form, things can change. This is politics, it gets dramatic. And we'll see how that shakes out behind closed doors leading up to the 2025 session. And then if they get big social conservative priorities across the finish line, like DEI, which we saw did not pass, an anti-DEI bill did not pass this past legislative session. That's a really big priority for Liberty folks who I think are a little more energized by the kind of topic of the month when it comes to the conservative movement, and are a little more online, I think it's fair to say. And the anti-DEI movement is kind of a conservative movement that's been pushed by the sort of new, very online wing of the American right.
Yeah. Well, Austin Horn, politics writer for the Lexington Herald-Leader, thank you for being with us tonight, and we'll let you get back to writing.
Thanks, Renee.
We want to go back now to Bowling Green. Our Laura Rogers has State Representative Michael Meredith with her right now. And Laura, I will throw it right to you. Good to see you again.
All right. Thank you so much, Renee. And Michael, you've got to feel good about that successful race tonight. Tell us, I think it was 75% of the vote that you have gotten. Does that exceed your expectations?
It certainly did. I felt good about the race for a long, long time, but 75% was much more than what we hoped for. Very, very pleased. Edmonson County showed up in a huge way. About 25 to 30% of the Republicans in Edmonson County voted today. They had a huge turnout and overwhelmingly cast their ballots for me. And Warren County showed up in a big way too. We had a great race down here. I think it was 69% in Warren County and 88% in Edmonson County was the margin.
Does that give you confidence about the job that you're doing in Frankfort?
It makes me feel really good. We always wanted to make this race about the things that we had been able to do, the things that we had accomplished over the last several years, and we did that. And we also made this race about the district, about what we needed to do here, and about the people and this place that is so important to me. And the people showed up today for us, and that makes you feel really, really good.
And the needs of the district are different. You and I were talking last week. Edmonson County, very different, of course, in demographics compared to Warren County. But we're seeing growth really in both areas, a lot of growth, especially in the Bowling Green area.
We are tons of growth here, fastest growing county in the state, one of the largest cities and counties in the state, top 5 in both categories. But Edmonson's growing too. Last year I think Edmonson was one of the top 11 fastest growing counties in the state per capita. So the things that are happening in Warren County either have a direct or indirect impact on what's going on in Edmonson County too. And so we're tied together in a lot of ways. And so the two counties flow together very, very well.
Do you have concerns about the county being able to keep up with that growth?
I think that's why we need strong leaders in Frankfort, people with experience, people that can get the job done. And we've got a great team, both in the Senate and in the House, who understand the needs of Warren County and fight for the needs of Warren County and the infrastructure that we need to build here over the next several years.
And you are chair of the Banking and Insurance Committee. So let's talk about some of the priorities as we go into already looking ahead to the next legislative session, because you won't have an opponent in November. What are going to be some things that you still want to accomplish when the General Assembly reconvenes?
You know, we continue to work on consumer protection measures in the House Banking and Insurance Committee. We passed some legislation this time related to that on the financial services side. We passed some legislation dealing with auto glass and insurance in that realm as well this time. And it seems like every time another state tightens their laws up, the bad actors in those states try to come to Kentucky. And so there'll be something that comes up over the summer in either insurance or financial services where we need to work on consumer protection and making things better there. We need to try to support our small banks across Kentucky. We continue to lose those at a rapid pace, and we've got to support them. And we need to keep and be aware of needing a very, very stable insurance market in the state with all the natural disasters that we've had over the last several years. And so we'll continue working on all those issues.
All right. Thank you so much. State Representative Michael Meredith, reelected to his seat in the primary tonight here in the 19th District. We are live at the Warren County Courthouse, and Renee, we'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Laura, for your great work. I think that might be the last time we see you tonight, and thank you so much for efforting that interview very quickly and turning that around. We appreciate it. Let's talk a couple of things before we move on to another interview with Joe Sonka, conducted by our June Leffler. Let's talk about the 4th Congressional District race. I know Trey, the one who spells his name correctly, is chomping at the bit because we thought Eric Dieters would be more of a competitor, maybe, or what happened?
Yeah,
How did he fall off?
He really didn't do much of a campaign. I mean, he did his normal videos and live feeds, but right now he's 3rd with like 13% of the vote, losing to an unknown candidate. So this was a race that, you know, when Dieters got in, we were all, you know, he made got some traction in the governor's race.
Made some noise.
Made some noise. You know, was on the debate stage. We're making some noise, as you remember, but got annihilated. And this has got to be embarrassing for him.
Yeah, the end of the road for him on the political stage.
He probably was unelectable anyway, but like this is an embarrassing loss, and he's got to think about, do I, you know, really want to spend that $500 and get on the ballot again and see this happen again?
Yeah. Couple of House districts of note. House District number 76. This is an interesting race. The Dean of the House, Ruth Ann Palumbo, retiring, and her son is one of the contenders, along with Ann Gay Donworth. And this hasn't been called yet, but it's close, Kelsey Coots.
Yeah, it looks like Ann is probably going to eke it out. And, you know, she ran a big, effective campaign. She had a great story to tell. She has been in the community and has been a servant leader. And, you know, in this sort of, I think, change environment, it's interesting because obviously he is a great candidate too, but with the Palumbo name that is so well known, maybe that could have also worked against him because he's been viewed as a pseudo-incumbent. But I would say this is an upset tonight.
And there were some big names behind both of these candidates, right, Bob Babbage?
Yes, for sure. Donworth did many things very well in this campaign. She has strong family roots in the community, for certain, and many friends. Has been a civic force for good, the fundraiser for the new libraries in Lexington that are terrific successes. The Palumbo brand, the Palumbo name, around a long time. A lot of people thought Palumbo had the edge all along. His mother, longest-serving woman, not dean and longest-serving woman as well. Quite the record of service on her part in many respects in the community. So a very good race. We didn't see this devolve into all the name calling and all the other stuff we've seen other places. Very high-minded, very strong platforms, very committed people, but it looks like Donworth wins by a few.
Yeah. Let's talk about the 93rd House District. This newcomer here, Adriel Camuel.
Yeah.
Talk about this, Sarah Ritter.
Yeah, so the thing that I'm always so blown away by with Representative Camuel's team is how many doors they knocked. They knocked over 10,000 doors for this race, and as you all remember, she was in a special election back in the fall, and I think they knocked 15,000 for that. So in the course of however many months, you know, not less than a year, they've knocked that small area over 25,000 times. And that's how you win races. Yeah. And so, yes, she was an effective fundraiser and raised $47,000, but her team still got the doors knocked even though she was in session.
And she came to the post in unfortunate circumstances, right, through the death of Lamine Swan last year. So we'll keep our eyes still. We got a lot more races to keep our eyes on it, and we thank you. Let's just do a reset here. If you're just joining us, you've missed some good stuff if you're just joining us, but it's online for you to go back and watch. I'm Renee Shaw. all. You're watching KET's primary coverage. This time around, we've got the same group we had last year. They're a good group with us. We got Al Cross, Bob Babbage, Kelsey Coots, Amy Wycliffe, Trey Trey Grayson, and then we also have on the other side of the studio, we've got Trey Watson and Jared Smith, who I'll go talk to in just a bit. We've had reporters in the field. Great job by our Laura Rogers, who's been in Bowling Green, and June Leffler, who we'll go back to in just a moment, who's with us in Louisville, and we'll get to her in just a bit. So we've had a pretty good night here, solid, and Amy,
yeah,
give us a reset here.
It looks like down in Senate District 1, some of these Western Kentucky races are starting to come in. It looks like the Jason Howes race in SD1, he has performed extremely well. It looks like that has been called or getting close to being called. Of course, he was being challenged by former state representative Lynn Beckler, who was trying to make a comeback in the Senate, but it looks like he's going to come up several votes short. And keep in mind, this was Senator Howes' first race when this is his second term, but when he came in on his last term, he had no primary, he had no general, and so this has really been his first test of being out on the campaign. So I would say tonight the theme is the message of, are you conservative enough, right? That is the message tonight. And I think that is what a lot of us are going to be looking at when we take a look tomorrow at these races, headed into general elections, headed into the next legislative session. What does that mean? How does that message work? And how are we going to be able to really work with that message or around that message?
And how can you govern?
And how can you govern, right? But I think there's also been some challenges to that message, right? Kim Moser, which I think is going to be fine. Michael Meredith, right? I think they were all trying to say, they tried to call Michael Meredith a socialist. And so I think the message that in those two places, you know, of course they're conservatives, right? But I think in other places where that was challenged, that message.
Yeah, Boone 66, right? I mean, 66, that area.
I think I'd add on to what Amy said is, I mean, also to macro level, this is still a really Republican state with going to have a very Republican legislature. We haven't identified, other than maybe the 45th district that we talked about a little bit earlier, a seat that is now more in play in the fall than it was before. You know, we've seen some upsets, and we've seen some insurgents win in both parties. But you know, the whole, I think, leadership has got to feel pretty good at the end of the day that there weren't that many more, and some of these margins there was just a clear repudiation. You know, Jason Howell, as Amy said, he's, in full disclosure, like one of my best friends. I was in his wedding, he was in mine. But he hadn't won. I remember being on the phone with Jenny Scutchfield, the Assistant Secretary of State, 4 years ago when filing deadline hit and nobody had filed. And Beckler had been around. Beckler was running on I'm more conservative than Jason Howell. And Jason almost beat him in Crittenden County, Beckler's home county, and destroyed him all across the rest of the district. Went out to find the race, ran a good campaign. So, you know, I think on the whole, leadership's got to be pretty pleased. And if you're a Republican, you still have to feel pretty good about where the state is headed as far as, control.
Yeah, before we go to Louisville, we've kind of overlooked the top of the ticket, Al Cross, president.
What's that?
What is that? Yeah.
Well, we knew, of course, that President Biden and former President Trump were going to win their primaries going away, but there's always a question about how much opposition remains to them in each of their parties. And I wrote a column that said the anti-Trump vote might be a suggestion of the effect of his court case and other things on his chances in the fall. Well, not so much in this state, because Nikki Haley got only 6.4% of the Republican vote. Uncommitted got 3.6%. So that's basically a 10% repudiation of Donald Trump. You can't really say the other candidates were repudiation because they've endorsed Trump. Haley has not. And she got 9.4% of the vote in West Virginia. So in these terms, we are a Trumpier state than West Virginia. And it should be noted that President Biden has an even greater opposition in his primary. I think he had 71.4% of the vote, and uncommitted got 17.8 and had a couple of minor candidates.
I mean, I think, like in Boone County where I live, the only thing, if you were a Democrat, to vote for was the presidential race. So unless you were somebody who had to come in and vote, this was it. And, I have a family member who shall remain nameless. It's my younger daughter. who's a Democrat, and she went in specifically to vote for the first time. She voted uncommitted. She's not a fan of the president.
Right. It looks like Haley's best vote in the state was in Fayette County, where she got 15.3.
Yeah. We're going to go now back to our June Leffler, who is in Louisville, with Joe Sonka, who is the Enterprise State House reporter for Kentucky Public Radio and Louisville Public Media. June, it's yours.
Thanks, Renee. Joe, you covered the State House. Tell me what the results of tonight could mean for the GOP supermajority and the direction that they'll take in the next session.
Well, I don't think there's going to be a huge shift based on the results of the election, but I do think there is one significant outcome, is that the Liberty movement is not dead in Frankfort. There was a lot of PAC money spent to try to beat back their numbers in Frankfort, but that looks like it has failed. 2 years ago, when there were 3 candidates, Liberty candidates who defeated incumbent chairman in Northern Kentucky, a lot of people said, well, this is just a Northern Kentucky phenomenon. They're kind of strange up there, but it's not going to affect the rest of the state. Well, the results tonight showed that they're kind of spreading. In Fayette County, you have Killian Timoney losing by a very wide margin against Thomas Jefferson. I don't know if the race has been called, but it looks like Aaron Reed, the last I looked, was up by about 100 votes in the Senate district in District 7, defeating, if the vote is called there, defeating Ed Galrine, who is supported by GOP leadership. Also in Western Kentucky, you have Kim Holloway with a stunning upset of longtime incumbent and Agriculture Committee Chairman Richard Heath. So they're kind of, and those are all candidates that are going to kind of align with that part of the caucus. So they are kind of spreading a bit. And you look at all the money, the PACs on the establishment side spent about $1.4 million trying to beat Stephen Doan in Northern Kentucky, trying to defeat Marianne Proctor in Northern Kentucky, trying to defeat Bill Wesley in Central Kentucky, trying to beat Candy Massaroni in Nelson County, and they didn't come really close in all of those races. And if you look at the upcoming session, I think one of the big things you see is it's going to be harder for more moderate Republicans voting on social conservative issues, because you have Killian Timoney, who voted against the anti-trans bill, the transports ban. He loses by a wide margin. You have Kim Moser in North Kentucky, who was supposed to be pretty safe there, and she wound up winning by just a very, very small margin. She voted against that bill. So what you could see is a lot of more moderate Republicans may be on uneasy footing when it comes to social conservative legislation, and I would certainly expect to see some of that coming in the next session. And there may be more hesitance to kind of push that kind of legislation aside when you have such a strong results in the Republican primary, where the base is showing that they don't want representatives who take those kind of votes, and just barely Kim Moser.
And do you see any changes happening in leadership and committee chairs?
I don't think there was enough of a shift that Speaker Osborne or Senate President Stivers have to worry about losing their positions. There may be some smaller leadership positions, chairmen, whips who might have a harder race, but for the large part, these aren't huge numbers of shifts within the caucus. But I think the more social conservative side of the caucus kind of gained a little bit along with the Liberty side, and they have kind of an odd alliance of sort that's kind of growing. It's still a minority, I would say, in the caucus. The majority of the caucus is still the more Chamber of Commerce aligned, a part of conservatism and Republicans, but it's going to get more interesting.
And if you could just give us a headline for this primary season, this primary election night that we're having, what would that headline be?
I would say that the Liberty movement within the Kentucky GOP isn't dead just yet. They took a strong, the establishment side took a strong swing with their PACs and over $1 million of ads, but they stood their ground, and they're still within the caucus and even managed to grow a little. So they're not done yet.
Joe, thank you. You've been amazing. And thank you to Louisville Public Media as well. Back to you, Renee.
Yeah. Thank you, June, so very much. And we do want to thank Louisville Public Media, who is one of our public radio partners who's also simulcasting our broadcast tonight. So thanks to them and all of our partners in public radio. So let's dive into something that Joe Sonka just said at the very end there, because June asked him for a headline, which I'll ask the other crew, and I'll ask you guys too. And he said the Liberty Party is not dead yet. Is that an overstatement, oversimplification of what we're seeing tonight? What's your perspective, Trey Watson?
No, I think they're definitely, you look back at the history of the Republican Party, there's always factions that come in and they eventually get kind of brought in and married into the rest of the party. You had the Pat Robertson people in the 80s. You had the Tea Party. You had the Liberty Movement. I still believe that it'll eventually get kind of homogenized, and we'll come back together as the big tent party. But as with all those instances before, there was a period of a struggle where everybody was out to get each other. So I think we'll get there. But again, I think it just comes back to turnout. These Liberty candidates have a limited but very active appeal. And when you don't have casual voters showing up to vote, they're going to perform extremely well.
And so, Jared Smith, when we look at a couple of these districts where maybe some of those insurgent candidates, which is our new lexicon for the night, may have been victorious in some races where they could be vulnerable to Democrats. House District 45, the Lexington race with Representative Killian Timoney, who was defeated tonight, Thomas Jefferson winning that race. But there is a Democrat who could be victorious in November.
Yeah, and I think Trey Grayson said this earlier. That's probably really the only one where the insurgent candidate really tilts the field a little bit to the Dem in that race. Adam Moore, he served in Iraq. He's a great businessman, great leader. Has been in D.C. And he's really going to give people that in that suburban district that are not interested in the insurgent message, they're going to listen to what Moore has to say.
Yeah. So let's talk about House District 76 while I've got you talking. This is an interesting race.
Yeah, it ended up interesting. I think it goes back to the low turnout. Jamie Palumbo was the de facto incumbent, and he gets this low turnout, and Dunworth proved to be a very solid candidate. But, I don't think anybody had Buckman getting 15% of that vote. I mean, I think he
overperformed?
Yeah, I think he overperformed, and I think he actually cost Palumbo the election, to be honest.
Interesting. And what's his background? Do we know?
Not really.
Yeah. Okay. House District 50. Talk to us about this.
Kenny Mazzaroni kind of came in with a quirky election 2 years ago where Chad McCoy dropped out late and kind of the chosen replacement had to try to fire up an entire campaign in 28 days and just couldn't quite get there. But she didn't, kind of similar to Proctor up in Northern Kentucky, didn't take a lot of the tougher votes like Doan and Rayburn and Maddox have taken, who were in stronger, more conservative-friendly districts. Mazzaroni stayed closer to leadership on the budget and House Bill 5 and some of that stuff, and I think that probably was enough to get her through. And again, turnout was very low there. I know the Stone campaign was hoping for higher turnout, especially in the city, and they didn't get it, and it wasn't enough to overcome the outer parts of the county.
One we haven't talked about is House District 47. This is the Felicia Rayburn race. How's that going?
Rayburn's won it. It was, I think, probably closer than most people expected. Gilkison worked hard, spent a lot of, actually out fundraised her, knocked a lot of doors. I think they did 7 mail pieces, is what I was told. But again, I think some of these rural districts are just, they're very kind of in line right now with that with that wing of the party, and there's just a tough hill to overcome. And again, don't ever undersell the power of incumbency. It is hard to beat an incumbent, very hard to beat an incumbent, and that carries weight.
And even if they may be considered a Liberty or an insurgent candidate this time around.
Yeah, they still have that incumbency label behind them, and it gets them on stages that the challengers can't.
Yeah. One race that's already been called, we've talked about it, but it has been officially been called by the Associated Press in the state Senate, Senate District 33, Gerald Neal v. Attica Scott. Interesting race. We talked about it last night. Gerald Neal seemed to have a sound victory here tonight.
He did. And, I was a little concerned by the campaign there. I thought, maybe Senator Neal was going to just not grind it out, but like, I got this.
Phone it in.
And guess what? He was right. I was wrong. He was right. He performed very well. Attica didn't do terrible, but, that just wasn't her race, even though I thought at the beginning when she filed, she might have had a shot.
Yeah. And as we talked earlier, like if we talk about insurgent candidates, she would be the insurgent candidate in this race.
The Senate is probably losing Southworth, and then if Scott became a senator, it'd be probably more in that vein, except on the Democratic side.
Yeah. A question that Amy Wycliffe, or a phrase, or if you will, for the night that we may be talking more about as we go into the general election is, are you conservative enough? How do you answer that question?
I think the question is, what are you talking about when you talk about conservative? Because I think there's a lot of hypocrisy, admittedly, on kind of my side of the issue, but on the other side of the issue as well. You know, I remember fighting very hard to get this, to make the state become a right-to-work state, and now you have kind of the insurgent wing of the party, the Liberty people, trying to put the government in between the employee-employer relationship to a greater degree. That was the whole point about right-to-work, was to get the government out of that relationship. So, you know, I think that it's kind of in the eye of the beholder as to what conservative is, and we've reached a point kind of where I think it's been used before that we're kind of in a post-fact era, where just it's the George Costanza, it's not a lie if you believe it. And just, you know, if I say I'm conservative and you're not, and I have more money than you and can get my message across better, then I'm conservative and you're not. So you know, I think we're in an era where just whoever's got the loudest megahorn controls the definition of who's conservative.
Pick up on that, Jared Smith, but also how do Democrats get back in the game here? We heard Morgan Ease, who's the executive director of the Kentucky Democratic Party, talk about you're in a rebuilding phase right now, but when do you really get competitive back in the game again?
Well, let me answer that question.
Sure.
Are you conservative enough? The answer is, in Boone County, you're not. I don't care who you are. You're not, based on the votes. The Democratic Party needs, you know, they need good candidates like Adam Moore's, and need to point out what Liberty people are doing or insurgent people are doing. I mean, they are taking things away from people that had them. And so after a while, that starts to come back on you, you know. Transgender minors can't access the same drugs they used to be able to access before, even though every medical official said they need those drugs. Now, I'm not talking about the surgery. I'm just talking about the drugs. They can't do that. You know, they can't play on sports teams. The girl that played on the lacrosse team in middle school, they literally took her away, took her teeth from her. And so when you do stuff like this, you know, the pendulum's going to start swinging back quicker.
When you think about like big tent party, we talked about this a little bit last night, and Democrats have claimed to be the big tent party, and now Republicans claim to be the big tent.
No.
Right.
No.
So for Democrats, I mean, widening that tent, does that mean that the platform is wider, that it would embrace a pro-life Democrat like you had with an Angie Hatton or a Rocky Atkins? Or, I mean, are more of those type people needed in order for the Democrats to gain some ground in the state legislature?
Well, I want to be careful. If you're in a suburban district and you're not talking about choices as a Democrat, that's campaign malpractice in the fall. And so in the post-Dobbs era, you could be a pro-life Democrat as long as there's exceptions for rape, incest, as long as there's a clear time of when you can still have an abortion. And so that's okay then. Now, no, you can't be a pro-life Democrat when, you know, there's no exceptions for rape or incest.
What is the strategy? What is the winning message for Democrats right now?
Sanity. The adults in the room. Don't turn Frankfurt into Congress, into D.C.
Yeah. How do you get more Adam Moores to run for office?
Just got to recruit. I mean, they're out there. You just got to go find them. But then again, when you see mailers that went against Killian Timoney, Representative Timoney, it's a tough sell. It's a tough sell.
Yeah. I asked you this before. Does this, tell anything about what we could be seeing in the 2025 legislative session? It's early, we know, but will business run like it's always run, or will there be some obstructive type behavior?
I don't know. You know, the issue to keep an eye out on is a lot of people who are winning that had tough campaigns put up against them tonight are strong supporters of a full repeal of certificate of need, which I think shows a complete misunderstanding of the healthcare economy of the state. But you know, that's an issue that kind of got punted this session.
Yeah, into a task force.
Yeah,
right?
and this is the second year of the task force, and a lot of these candidates ran saying that they were going to repeal certificate of need.
Which is really a Northern Kentucky issue more so, isn't it?
It is. And again, we talked about last night, a lot of it has to do...
This is hospital certificate need.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do not with certificate of need, has to do with their specifically mad at St. Elizabeth Healthcare for vaccine requirements for nurses. That's the genesis of a lot of this issue. But, you know, I would think that that's one to keep an eye on. There's going to be a lot of effort put against it because it will hurt rural health care. But, you know, I think issues like that were being studied and had a little bit of momentum, you know, maybe that's something where somebody who was on the fence but is worried about a primary challenge might be a little bit more malleable on that issue. Yeah. I don't know.
So looking ahead to the next legislative session, and we know this is premature, but for Governor Andy Beshear, you know, Democratic governor, how does he move his agenda forward? Even though there may end up only being 78 Republicans, it's still more than a supermajority that you need.
I don't think anything's going to change.
Yeah.
The governor's not really interested in making nice with the legislature, and the legislature's not really interested in being nice with the executive branch. So I see no changes.
Jared Smith, Trey Watson, TRES. Thank you so much. Appreciate you so very much. Right now, we're just going to take a little reset and let you see some of the results of the races so far, top of the ticket, congressional races, and also some of these key state house races that we've been discussing this evening. You are watching KET's primary election coverage 2024. Stay with us. Thank you for sticking around with us for KET's primary coverage 2024. I'm Renee Shaw, along with Al Cross, Bob Babbage, Kelsey Coots, Amy Wycliffe, and Trey Grayson. And our thanks to Jared Smith and Trey Watson for being with us before for a little bit tonight. Also to our reporters in the field, June Leffler and Laura Rogers. And thank you at home for watching tonight, even though you may be watching on our broadcast or you might be listening through our partnership with one of our public radio partners, in particular LPM. Thank you so very much for carrying our broadcast this evening. So we're going to put a bow on things here in the next 16 minutes we have remaining. Let's start with you, Kelsey, on House District 36. Talk to us about this race.
Yeah, it looks like with 99% in, that in the Democratic primary is a 5-vote margin. And that's not one that I've seen a ton about, but I do know that William Zorn, I think goes by Woody, who is up by the 5 votes. He comes from a family of public servants, and I've seen that they've, again, been knocking on doors and pounding the pavement. And that is one that was former Representative Jerry Miller, and then so it's only been a new legislator in Representative Hogsden, I believe, for one term. But yeah, 5 votes. I think this one might be the closest one of the
so
nights.
far. Yes.
far.
Okay. So let's talk about Senate District number 7. We've talked about this a little earlier in the evening, but we've got a little bit of a development here. Amy Wycliffe?
Yeah, it sounds like it hasn't been called yet, but we're sitting here with Aaron Reed. What I'm hearing is that he's probably going to eke this out with maybe 100 votes over Ed Galrine. So this is an incumbent, Senator Adrienne Southworth, who will go home. It's looking like tonight she's going to run third. There was a lot of outside money spent in this race. You know, in a three-way race, you always wonder what's going to happen, because especially you had Aaron Reed and Ed Gowron are both from Shelby County. Adrian Southworth is in Anderson County. Anderson County is the only county left in her original district that she ran in. So Shelby, Henry, and those southern precincts in Jefferson County were all new to her.
Did she even win Anderson County?
So I haven't.
Apparently not.
Apparently.
We heard that Reed had carried Anderson County.
No, it looks like she's running second in Anderson County.
I went through there and saw lots of Aaron Reed signs, more than Southworth.
Yeah. And let's talk about the credentials of an Aaron Reed over or in comparison to Adrian Southworth.
Yeah, well, and Aaron Reed and Ed Gowron, you had two Navy SEALs running against an Adrian Southworth. And I will say Adrian and Aaron really come from a similar kind of ink of the party, right? They're more of that liberty type of the party. I think he flies that liberty flag a little bit more than Adrian does. But I would say, you know, Ed is definitely kind of the more pro-business, traditional, mainstream Republican in that group. This was an interesting race. The Senate Republican caucus did spend money in this race. They did not go negative. I think that's an important point to make. They spent money in support of Ed Gowron, being a farmer, pro-business, you know, kind of self-made businessman there in Shelby County. Aaron Reed has really been running for this seat for a long time. I mean, he almost challenged Paul Hornback, and then redistricting came through, and so there's probably been Aaron Reed signs out for the last 4 years. So this is an interesting one, that, you know, an incumbent, but I would say this is a status quo in terms of, you know, I've been keeping track of, you know, where the kind of the Liberty Party stands, and this is a draw.
So we've had two incumbents fall tonight.
So
Timoney and
Southworth, yeah.
And maybe Heath.
And maybe Heath. So that race has not been confirmed yet.
Yeah,
so Heath has been.
I got a text that said Heath had called to concede or had conceded on local radio.
Okay, so that's three incumbents. So anything else about that?
Well, in this case, the loss of Gowron, who was essentially the establishment candidate, is a big loss for the establishment. I mean, his ads were all over TV, and you can tell looking at the results, he did best in Jefferson County, where people didn't really know him except by TV.
I think, you know, Southworth, and Amy made an interesting comparison on issues. Southworth and Reed might be pretty similar, but Southworth was more of an iconoclast, more of a, you know, go her own way. And I think Aaron's probably going to be one who's going to partner up with some of the more liberty-minded members of the state Senate. I mean, Southworth was punished, if you will, by putting her with the Democrats over in the corner in the front of the floor.
And by redistricting.
You know, Reed like started running this race as, you know, Hornback had to wait 2 more years, and but Southworth, just for those who you know forget this, she worked for former Lieutenant Governor Janine Hampton, and there was some controversy during that time, and she was fired, and she won a four-person race in the primary, and then won a pretty, you know, an open Senate seat 4 years ago that at the time included Franklin County. And you know, Anderson was a pretty good base. It usually has pretty high turnout in the primary because a lot of state employees are there, so it votes a little bit above state average in primaries. But I think the writing was on the wall. The only question I think we had was, would two Shelby County candidates split the vote and allow her to win, and would turn out be pretty low? And it was pretty clear that that wasn't going to be the case.
Yeah, I think we knew pretty early on through a couple rounds of polling that Southworth was just not going to be competitive in this race. And so I think for a long time people knew that this was going to be a Reed versus Gowron race, and I think that's why you saw the amount of money that was spent there.
The other fun fact about Southworth was that she and her sister both served. So her sister won a special election. But
Courtney
Gilbert, and Ryan Bivens is going to winning the primary. Gilbert didn't run in that seat, so Bivens will be the favorite in the fall. He could be the next ag chair if Heath in fact did lose. And so, but right now we have two sisters, and it's the first time that's ever happened. There was a nice little ceremony at the end of the legislative session with one in the House, one in the Senate.
And then they sang together in the Senate.
They sang together, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things their family's known for.
Yeah, they do have an album out.
And what about Rhonda Davis, the Democratic nominee in the 7th? Do we know anything about Rhonda Davis?
I don't know a ton about her. I know that she's raising money and doing all the things you do when you're in an uncontested primary, but I don't know a ton about that race.
But a race that you probably can comment on, which has a 50-vote margin. This is Daniel Grossberg. This is House District 30. This has tightened up even more since we last talked about it.
Yes, yes. I was getting text actually after the last time we talked about it, and I think Representative Grossberg's opponent knocked something like 8,000 doors. And so, again, we were saying, oh, that was a surprise. Well, it's probably not a surprise when you know that he's knocked 8,000 doors. However, I know that I think that race has also been controversial, and they've been, I think some attacks have been launched at Representative Grossberg. But again, he is holding on, and he may hold on here at the end. And like I said, I think he generally communicates with constituents, and people think he's a good legislator. So we'll see if he hangs on.
Let's talk about a local race. Wet, dry vote where, Al Cross?
Knott County went wet tonight on the 4th try.
Cheers.
Hey, that's non-alcoholic, just in case you're wondering.
Yeah, water.
Eric Gregory of the Kentucky Distillers Association will have an extra bourbon. There are, according to one of my sources, only 4 counties left in Kentucky where no form of alcohol is legally available.
One is his home county.
One is my home county, Clinton. Also, Menifee, Elliott, and maybe some viewer can tell us in the next 8 minutes what the other one is.
Yeah. Has there been movement to make those wet?
There has been a vote in Clinton County some years back, and there may be another one soon.
Yeah. Amy?
Another Commonwealth Attorney's race that I'm getting some intel on that we haven't talked about down in the Bull County, Mercer County area. This is one where I think Democrats have always held this seat as the Commonwealth Attorney down there, and for the first time a Republican will be winning that seat. And it sounds like Justin Johnson is going to be winning that primary, and that will take the race. So
I just don't think Commonwealth attorneys ought to be partisan officers. They are more judicial officers than they are political officers. And I think we've had nonpartisan judicial elections in the state. I think people like that. And it'd suit me if Commonwealth attorneys were a nonpartisan race, but I don't think there's much sentiment in the legislature to make it that way.
There's not. People like to know who they're voting for. They like to know who they're aligned with. I think that's...
But I don't think the issues in a Commonwealth attorney's race have anything to do with the issues of a political party.
I think it could. I think when you talk about tough on crime, when you talk about treatment of victims and the just on crimes, not everybody is.
Everybody who runs for Commonwealth attorney is, I'll guarantee you that.
Right.
Well, not everybody runs for prosecutor in America.
That's
has
right.
That view.
That's right.
Yeah. So as we've got about 7 minutes remaining, Bob Babbage, I want to come to you as we try to kind of put a bow on things tonight. What would you say are the major headlines coming out of primary 2024 in Kentucky?
Well, GOP leaders definitely had an impact in holding off some of the liberty movement, but should be a net gain for the liberty effort. We'll probably see more of it, just given a couple of case studies tonight. That's one to watch. Timoney and Heath are 2 exceptional people, highly regarded, very popular. And to see them lose is going to be something people have to deal with, because both have served exceptionally well. Resumes irrelevant in some respects. We have an angry electorate in many ways, and we are weaponizing and seizing on that anger almost to an irrational extent in some of the mailings that have been made, some of the highly slanderous and irrational mailings that have been made and stuck.
Al Cross, you want to add to that?
I can't disagree with that. I think there is less reliable information out there about candidates because the newspapers have devolved and are not giving as much coverage. Television has never given that much in-depth coverage. In a primary like this where there's so many races, it's an impossible task for a television station to do very much. I salute the newspapers that did make an effort to both cover the races in their territories and make endorsements. Newspaper endorsements are becoming less popular, frankly, because the companies that own newspapers are scared to death of their readers. But I think newspapers that do a good job covering elections have an obligation to share with their readers their best judgment of these candidates. And I just hope that the people who own newspapers 10 years from now will do a better job of than what they're doing today.
I think the Herald Leader went over 3 because they endorsed 10 and 8, which when you're a Republican in a primary in this environment, you probably don't want.
We didn't talk about
that's
House
right.
District
When they did
77.
that,
And George Brown's opponent was endorsed, and Brown won, I think, and then and they endorsed Palumbo. So they were. I think those were the only 3 legislative races. They did some urban county government races, but I think we're in this. This is an unusual election. We didn't have a U.S. Senate race at all. We're used to not having the presidential race drive turnout. Right. We didn't have any meaningful congressional race driving any turnout. There were no local races on the ballot this year. It was just these state Senate, state rep primaries, and a few Commonwealth attorneys. So turnout was low. These kinds of races only happen, I think 2012 was the last time when we had something like this, because in 2018, the no U.S. Senate race lined up with the county election year. And so just a different electorate. And, I think we've seen over the last couple of years that sometimes incumbents who haven't had a challenge in a while, like, Richard Heath, Holloway tried to run against him last time, and there was a technical problem with her papers. And so she wasn't able to run. So she tried to run as a write-in, which we've actually now closed, that if you're disqualified, you can't run as a write-in. But some of these incumbents who haven't had real challenges before are learning that primaries are tough. We're also in this new environment where Republicans have such really big majorities that for both parties, there's a lot of safe Democratic seats. There's a lot of safe Republican seats. So the action is all in a primary. And so when they go to vote, they're going to have to keep that in mind. And while, we talked about, you might lose because you voted your conscience, you want to keep your seat. And so sometimes, you have to keep that in the back of your mind. You don't want to go to sellout when you get to Frankfurt. But if you're an elected official, there is this balancing act of, do you represent the voters, or do you represent your conscience? And this has been one of the tales as old as time. Like, political philosophers wrote about this back in the Grecian and Roman eras. But it's still true today.
Amy?
I would say the headline for tomorrow is, despite significant outside spending, no major shifts in the legislature. We didn't spend a lot of time on all the different groups who participated in this race on both sides, on all sides of this issue. But if you look at the amount of spending that went on, you come out with a wash in the Senate. Senate's a hold everywhere you look. And in the House, you have +1, maybe a +2 by the time the results are all in tonight on the Liberty insurgent candidates. So I would say, there were a lot of holds on the Liberty side, but at the end, no major shifts in the legislature.
Yeah.
If there is momentum, it is with the insurgents, but it's not Big Mo.
And I would thank poll workers, too, and I'm sure Trey would as well, and Secretary Adams, Deputy Secretary Scutchfield. Low turnout, but they ran a flawless election from what we can tell.
Right. Kelsey Coots, I'll give you one of the last words for the evening.
I was just going to say, for Democrats, opportunity as the headline, just because there are, I think, some unexpected things that happened, at least on the Republican side. There's going to be some infighting that folks are maybe going to have to heal from and decide how hard are they going to go swinging for each other in the general. And I think there's some opportunities about some of those races that we talked about tonight. One that we actually didn't talk about was House District 31. The candidate that won was Colleen Davis against Susan Witten. And then, of course, Timoney. There's some of these that I think the opportunities there for the general.
And for the Democrats, as we just mentioned just a moment ago, House District 77, George Brown was able to maintain there over David. Last name, his name, Whitley. Yeah, an attorney here in Lexington. Al Cross, got some trivia for you. The fourth.
It's not trivia to people in Leslie County because they are still dry. Yeah. Along with Menifee, Elliott, and Clinton. And it's really remarkable how few dry counties there are left. Oh, wow. The yellow counties have some alcohol. The blue have no restrictions.
Wow. Excellent. So, like when you're around tomorrow, Wednesday quarterbacking, and you're like, okay, let's talk about what they talked about on KET, you're going to walk away knowing the 4 dry counties, right? That's what we do here. We like to mix it up.
Educate. Kentucky, it's our middle name.
That's right.
It is our middle name. That's what we do 24/7. Okay, so we might go out a little bit early tonight, but I do want to thank our public radio partners for being with us tonight. We want to thank all of our reporters who were in the field, Laura Rogers, June Leffler, Joe Sonka, who joined us, Austin Horn, also our other commentators on the other set, Jared Smith, and Trey Watson. We thank them, as well as our main gang right here tonight: Trey Grayson, Amy Wycliffe, Kelsey Coots, Bob Babbage, and Al Cross. Certainly, they're the ones who make this show what it is. I just kind of get out of their way. We do thank you for being with us tonight. Make sure you tune in tomorrow night at 6:30 Eastern, 5:30 Central for Kentucky Edition, where we also inform, connect, and inspire. And then on Friday night, Bill Bryant and a team of working journalists will be right here at this set to talk about the news of the week and break down even more of the races that were this week, and looking ahead to the November contest and even the state legislative session in 2025. I'm Renee Shaw. A pleasure to be with you as always. Take really good care, and I'll see you soon.